Knowledge and analogy. The preceding sections were concerned with general problem-solving heuristics and choosing the correct representation. These things work well for new problems without an obvious solution and without an obvious analogy. However, in practice, many of us solve problems on a daily basis that are very similar to problems that we solved yesterday, the day before, and last week. In other words, problem solving can be tedious. Problem solving often involves considerable repetition and benefits from the similarity between old problems and new problems. And so, effective problem solvers typically make use of prior knowledge and analogy when solving problems. Generally speaking, prior experience assists in solving your problems. This is especially true for experts who may be solving many similar problems. The final chapter will deal with expertise more explicitly, but a central component of expert-level performance is problem solving from memory rather than from general heuristics or algorithms. Even for non-experts, it is still fairly common to use prior experience or similar experiences when solving new problems. An excellent example was presented by Gick and Holyak, 1980. The central problem that participants were asked to solve is known as the laser tumor problem, one of the problems originally studied by Dunker, 1926. It reads as follows. A tumor was located in the interior of a patient's body. A doctor wanted to destroy the tumor with rays. The doctor wanted to prevent the rays from destroying healthy tissue. As a result, the high-intensity rays could not be applied to the tumor along one path. However, high-intensity rays were needed to destroy the tumor, so applying one low-intensity ray would not succeed. The problem to solve, then, is how to destroy the tumor with the rays without destroying any of the good tissue. Before you read any further, please take a few minutes to think about how you might solve this problem. Remember, the tumor cannot be operated on. The only way to save the patient is to destroy it with rays, i.e. lasers. How can this be done? In the original study, very few participants were able to solve this problem. When I discuss the problem in my lectures, I find that approximately 5 to 10% of students are able to generate the correct solution. Setting aside any students who may have encountered the problem in another class, many students mention possible solutions, such as a partial operation that allows the lasers to get closer. Many people answer that it cannot be done. Figure 10.9, an illustration of the laser and tumor problem. The lasers must be pointed at the tumor at a low intensity so that they intersect at the location of the tumor. The correct solution is that the physician should use multiple lasers, each set at a low intensity. Yeah, obviously. So you can see in the diagram, you have the tumor and then lasers pointing from different directions. Yeah, I mean, there's no other way to do it. The laser should be pointed at the tumor as shown in figure 10.9. Each laser is low intensity as it is directed into the body, and the intensity would be low enough not to damage the tissue. When the lasers intersect, however, the intensity is additive, such that the intersection point, and only the intersection point, is strong enough to destroy tissue. This allows for many low-intensity lasers to enter the body without causing damage and only reach high intensity at the precise location of the tumor. When this solution is explained to participants or students, they often mention that they did not realize that they could use more than one laser. The realization they experience is known as an insight. The laser tumor problem is an example of an insight problem. Once you gain the insight into the solution, it is often accompanied by a feeling of satisfaction. It seems really obvious once you know the answer. Realizing how difficult this problem is to solve, Gick and Holyak, 1980, examined the role of relevant and analogous knowledge. They asked a group of research participants to try to solve the problem. Subjects who were in the control condition were given the problem directly and asked to try to solve it. Other subjects were assigned to the experimental condition and were given another story first. Prior to seeing the laser tumor problem, subjects in an experimental condition were provided with the general and fortress problem. A fortress was located in the center of the country. Many roads radiated out from the fortress. A general wanted to capture the fortress with his army. The general wanted to prevent mines on the roads from destroying his army and neighboring villagers. As a result, the entire army could not attack the fortress along one road. However, the entire army was needed to capture the fortress because an attack by one small group would not succeed. The general therefore divided his army into several groups. He positioned the small groups at the heads of different roads. The small groups simultaneously converged on the fortress. In this way, the army captured the fortress. It should be clear that although these problems are different on the surface, they are analogous from a deep structure perspective. Both involve a central entity that needs to be attacked. Both involve risk with sending the entire force needed, and the smaller force was not enough for the job. Participants who were given the fortress story first, and who were told that it contained a hint, were able to solve the tumor problem correctly. Additional protocol analyses indicated that most participants did use the first problem as an analogy to help solve the second problem. Even participants who were not told that the first problem could help in solving the second problem were more likely to solve the problem than those who never saw the fortress problem. The central idea of this research is that many problems can be solved by realizing the analogy between other already solved problems. Insight problems. Some problems are difficult to solve, but when the solution is revealed, many people indicate that either they felt relieved to see the solution or, if they found the solution, they report that it happens suddenly. These kinds of problems are often known as insight problems, and they are all characterized by sudden insight. The archetypal and also apocryphal insight problem is that of Archimedes' discovery of fluid displacement. Archimedes was a scientist, philosopher, and mathematician in ancient Greece. Although there is very little evidence that this story is factually correct, the anecdote is still interesting and informative. The story goes that a crown had been made for the king. The king had supplied the pure gold to be used. Archimedes was asked to determine whether some silver had been mixed in, which would then indicate that the manufacturer of the crown had likely stolen some of the king's gold. Archimedes had to solve the problem without damaging the crown. While taking a bath, Archimedes noticed that the water in the tub rose when he got in. In other words, his body displaced the water. He realized that this displacement effect could be used to determine the volume of the crown. The submerged crown should displace an amount of water equal to its own volume and equal to the volume of gold that had been supplied. Archimedes realized that if the displacement was less than or more than expected, that other metals would have been added to the crown. According to the story, when he realized this, Archimedes jumped out of the bath and ran naked through the street yelling Eureka, which is from an ancient Greek expression meaning, "I have found it." As a result, the point at which many people suddenly come upon the solution to an insight problem is often referred to as the Eureka moment or an aha moment, because we say aha when we discover the trick to something. These Eureka moments are common for insight problems. What causes a sudden insight? The best answer seems to be that the sudden flash of insight occurs when problem solvers engage distinct neural and cognitive processes, which allow them to see connections that had previously eluded them. This can take the form of enhanced semantic activation within the semantic memory system. There is also evidence to suggest increased activation in the right anterior superior temporal gyrus for insight problems relative to non-insight problems. Furthermore, additional studies have noted that roughly 1.5 seconds before arriving at a solution, it is possible to detect a decrease in neural activity over the right visual cortex. It seems that the effects are not the result of emotion or a result of solving the solution, because the neural activity preceded the solutions. One possibility is that problem solvers change the focus of their efforts just before insight solutions, allowing some information to enter into awareness. Creativity. Creativity is often covered as a separate topic in the psychology of thinking. I want to cover it as a subtopic within problem solving because so much of the research in creativity is related to problem-solving research. It seems like a natural connection. People make creative decisions, creative predictions, and solve problems creatively by insight. And unlike just about every other topic in this book, with the possible exception of the psychology of language, people can engage in creativity and creative thinking for its own sake. People sing, make videos, post memes, play the piano, make pottery, and make art. We like to be creative. We like watching people be creative. We can even learn a living being creative. But how does creativity work psychologically? How does our cognitive system operate to produce creative behavior? Creativity is all around us. There are good examples of creativity all around us. Some examples seem obvious because they are in the popular arena. For example, when I was completing this chapter in early 2020, it happened to be movie awards season. The Golden Globe Awards led into the BAFTAs, and those in turn led into the Academy Awards. It's often a time when major and independent studios release and promote their best films. Some of these movies are incredibly creative, and their creativity is on display. The winner of the Academy Award for Best Picture that year was a South Korean movie, Parasite. I saw this movie around the time I was writing this chapter, and I thought it was very creative, more so than most of the other movies I saw that year. Why? It was familiar on the surface, but ended up being really different from what I had expected it to be. The director, Bong Joon-ho, made the familiar seem new and unfamiliar, which is an important aspect of creativity. It was also rich with metaphor and analogy, and as I'll discuss below, metaphor can also be a source of and a sign of creativity. Finally, it was beautifully filmed with interesting shots, contrasting beautiful architecture with dirty basement scenes, and also giving certain locations special lighting and symbolism. These aspects, challenging expectations, using metaphor, and exploring new contrasts, are part of what makes some movies seem more creative than others. These are all part of the novelty of creating something. Not all examples of creativity are given awards. There are many smaller, more mundane occurrences of creativity. For example, I remember seeing a photo of someone using a folding lawn chair to clear the snow from their sidewalk. That's a creative use of a chair for a novel purpose. My Instagram feed is often full of paid advertisements from companies with novel twists on familiar products, a business suit that repels water, a service that will pick out new foods for you to try. Marketers devise creative ways to sell products. For example, it's common to see the same product being rebranded and repackaged, like a jar of peanut butter that says "new look" and has a new label. These examples may not seem especially creative, and they certainly won't win an Academy Award or an award for inventions, but they are creative in the sense that something new was made, something was created. Furthermore, these examples share some important attributes of creativity with the movie example that I described above. They all try to take something familiar and make it new. They are the result of people who noticed a previously unnoticed connection and highlighted it in a new way. Those are some of the hallmarks of creativity. Those are some of the hallmarks of creative and clever thinking. What is creativity? Creativity can be described as a way of thinking, a set of behaviors, or an output and contribution. That is, we can distinguish between creative thinking and creative output. Unlike some of the other topics in this book, like memory, concepts, and induction, creativity has often been defined and described by people outside of the field of psychology. One such definition comes from George Prince, 1970, who was a best-selling author on the topic of creativity. His 1970 book, The Practice of Creativity, was designed to be a guide for managers and problem solvers in industry. They provide an excellent description of creativity that aligns well with the descriptions I gave at the outset. Creativity, according to Prince and Krug, involves aspects of expected astonishment and familiar surprise. He goes on to list seeming paradoxes like unexpected certainty and vital triviality. These are not psychological definitions, but they are clearly getting at one of the fundamental aspects of creativity, which is the desire or ability to see some new thing in something common and familiar. Robert Sternberg, 1996, defined creativity as the ability to produce work that is novel, i.e., original, unexpected, sufficiently high in quality, and useful and appropriate for the demand or the occasion. This is a broader and a general-purpose definition, but it still aligns with what I've described earlier. Sternberg and Lubart also define creativity as an intellectual investment. Individuals who are creative follow a basic investment strategy of buying low and selling high. That is, they may invest time and energy in a neglected area or an unexplored area, in business, the arts, or science, for example. With time, and as the interest in that area grows, many creative individuals will focus their attention elsewhere on new and unexplored areas. The creativity comes in finding those areas that are undervalued, underappreciated, or unexplored. The creativity comes from recognizing those aspects and capitalizing on them to create something new. There are many other definitions of creativity, so let's settle on one definition here. Creativity is a thought process that involves noticing unexpected connections between concepts, generating new and novel solutions to problems, and recognizing the need for alternative perspectives. Creative thinking. Human creativity in science, the arts, and engineering has been celebrated for most of our history. However, until the 20th century, the 1900s, the study of creativity and most of the theories of creativity have emphasized outside influences, the influence of the divine, metaphysics, or some kind of otherworldly muse. One of the earlier attempts to understand and explain creativity was proposed by the English socialist thinker and psychologist Graham Wallas, 1926, who described several stages that people engage in or go through when thinking creatively. These neatly parallel the stages of problem solving. For creativity, Wallas described an incubation stage, which is the phenomenological experience of not being able to solve a problem and yet feeling that your brain and mind are continuing to work at solving the problem. If you feel like a possible solution is imminent but not quite there, you are in the intimation stage. I used to experience this when I spent time computer programming. Often I would be unable to get the program to do what I wanted it to do. I would struggle and work but not succeed. Often I would go home for the night without completing the project and then wake up the next day and be able to solve it easily. This next stage is referred to as the illumination stage. This is where the solution to a problem, or the creative insight decision, seems to arrive suddenly. Not coincidentally, work on insight problem solving was very much in vogue at the time when Wallas wrote his book on creative thought. The idea of incubation, intimation, and illumination might have seemed to many people to argue for the existence of some kind of divine influence on creativity. From what we know about the way semantic memory is organized, and the way in which different brain regions are densely interconnected in prefrontal regions, it also suggests that basic spreading activation provides a better solution and a better explanation for how insight problems seem to be solved suddenly. Many low-level activations may converge on the correct solution. It is only when the concept or concepts connected to the correct solution are activated to an appropriate threshold that the solution seems evident. This might seem to be sudden from the perspective of conscious awareness, but the activation process might still reflect gradual association. Lateral and vertical thinking. The idea of spreading activation was used extensively by Edward de Bono in the 1970s and throughout the 1980s. De Bono was most famous for his pragmatic approach to creativity, and in 1970, he wrote a book on creativity for managers. He distinguished between two kinds of thinking and how they relate to creativity. Lateral thinking involves spreading activation, noticing new and novel connections, and thinking broadly across domains to generate solutions. De Bono describes this as thinking around a problem and generating possible solutions or exploration. Vertical thinking, on the other hand, is thinking deeply about a single topic. Metaphorically, We can think of lateral thinking as digging many holes to find a solution, but once we find a hole that is working, we concentrate on that hole and dig more deeply, as in vertical thinking. Or as De Bono puts it, lateral thinking is generating the solutions, and vertical thinking is working on one solution. Lateral thinking is what we describe as creativity. Vertical thinking is what we often describe as perseverance and problem solving. Creative output. Creative output is typically thought of as a work of art, music, or literature, but really creativity as an output can be a novel solution to a problem, a creative way to make money, or a novel engineering solution. There is much more to creativity than just the creative arts. Creative content or creative output is best described as possessing three qualities. The first is the quality of novelty. Creative content is something that is novel. A creative idea is a new idea. If you create a work of art or write a song, you are making something new. If you copy a work of art or cover someone else's song, you may embellish it or add something new, but it is significantly reduced in novelty. We might argue that a new, original song is potentially more creative than the cover version. Creative content is also assumed to be relatively high in quality. In other words, good creative content is not just novel, it is useful as well. New music that is noteworthy is generally rated by expert peers in the marketplace as being high in quality. In other words, just being new is not enough to be considered creative. Finally, creative content is produced with regularity. This means that not only is the creator making new, high-quality things, but they are also making them with some degree of predictive regularity. Sometimes, creators get something right and produce something remarkable, but do not produce another creation of the same quality. In 2015, the author Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, announced that she was going to publish a sequel, Go Set a Watchman. It turned out she had written Watchmen long ago, but had abandoned it and extracted parts of it to write To Kill a Mockingbird. When it was written, Mockingbird addressed aspects of race relations in the United States in a new way, and Harper Lee won praise for the high quality of her writing. Her book also earned its place in the canon of American literature. But it was her only book, and up until 2015, next to nothing was known about Lee's possible follow-up. The novel was published with great fanfare, but also great disappointment. It was not viewed in the same positive light and ultimately was regarded more as a curiosity and part of the history of Lee's work around Mockingbird rather than a strong novel in its own right. Ultimately, the publication of Watchmen did not diminish Harper Lee's standing, but did not enhance it either. Measuring creativity. Like many psychological constructs, it may be possible to measure creativity. This may seem counterintuitive, given the emphasis on novelty in the definition of creativity. One of the original attempts to measure creativity was designed by the psychologist J.P. Guilford, 1967. Guilford designed several tests that were rather like the insight problems described earlier. In many cases, they were problems that had a variety of solutions or no solution at all. Participants demonstrate their creativity by providing novel solutions, unusual answers, or by responding quickly to things that require some degree of creative thought. One of the most well-known examples is the unusual uses test. In the unusual uses test, the participant is given a list of common objects and asked to provide a set number of unusual uses for the object. They are instructed not to provide the most common use. For example, participants might be asked to provide unusual uses for a brick. Standard uses for a brick would be as a building material or an object to hold something down, but it is possible to imagine more unusual uses as well. A brick could be used to break a window. A brick could be used to silence an intruder. A brick could be used to create art by pulverizing it into a fine brick-colored dust and then using the dust to create a pattern. A brick could be used to cool something if it is saturated and allowed to evaporate. Another well-known measure of creativity is the Remote Associate Test, or RAT. The Remote Associate Test asks subjects to read 3 words and provide the one word that ties all 3 together. For example, If you are given the words river, note, and blood, the answer is bank, a river bank, a bank note, and a blood bank, which is a term for a medical repository for donated blood. If you are given the words boiled, lid, and flour, the correct answer is pot boiled, a pot lid, and a flour pot. These pairings vary in difficulty so that most people will find the correct word for some of the triads, but other triads will be nearly impossible. Both the unusual uses test and the remote associate test have been widely used in the psychological literature as well as in the education literature. They have been shown to correlate quite well with success in insight problems. See Dunker's candlebox problem described above. In many ways, the remote associate test has some benefits that the insight problems don't have. Insight problems are very complex and may not be solved. Furthermore, the complexity of these problems means that additional contextual variables may be introduced. For example, the subject simply may not understand the instructions. This might not mean that they are unable to solve problems or are lacking in creativity, but that the problem was written in a way that confuses the participant. The remote associate test avoids this problem by simplifying the response. Subjects respond with a single word. Summary. Problem solving is a central aspect of thinking behavior. From the simple to the complex, humans solve many problems throughout the day. When solving problems, people are actively engaging their semantic memory to look for a solution, and they may note the similarity between the current problem and previously encountered problems. The beginning of the chapter laid out the components of a problem and the general stages of the process of problem solving. If any of these parts are missing, the overall complexity of the problem may be increased. The history of problem-solving research traditionally emphasized the strategies and heuristics used by problem solvers to tackle novel problems. Many of these heuristics, such as hill climbing, are useful in that they provide some systematic way to move towards a solution, even for very new and unfamiliar problems. Other research has emphasized the importance of representation and how changing the way in which a problem is represented can help to provide a solution or possibly induce a state of insight. The characteristics of insight problem solving remain an exciting area of research, and some of the most up-to-date work depends on cognitive neuroscience methods and has shown activation in frontal brain regions that correspond to arriving at a solution. 2005. Creativity is a subtopic that relates to problem solving. Creative contributions are those that are novel, high quality, and produced with some degree of regularity. Researchers have developed ways to explain, measure, and encourage creativity. In many ways, the stages of creativity parallel the stages of insight problem solving, and both seem to show evidence for incubation, which is using the spreading activation model to activate lots of different stuff until eventually you hit a critical mass of activation and you get an insight about how to solve the problem.